Okay, I'm back for hopefully the rest of this particular section behind me that I piled up on my table here. The video was getting over 20 minutes long, and I thought that's a little too much. So let me start again and finish it all up. Next up is Insomnia. Insomnia, a great movie. Al Pacino, Robin Williams, Hilary Swank. Great mystery story with Al Pacino in a situation where he simply cannot get any sleep, and he gets involved in some very weird goings on with Robin Williams. Both of whom are excellent in this film, directed by Christopher Nolan. Next up is an Irish film called Intermission, starring let's see, Colin Farrell, Cillian Murphy, and Cole Meany, who of course is known by us Star Trek fans from Deep Space Nine. Very interesting, not terribly likable story, filled with unlikable characters for the most part, in Ireland. And I don't know if contemporary Irish life is anything like this. I certainly hope not. But it involves a lot of violence and really a lot of ugliness, ugly relationships. But supposedly it's a black comedy. I don't know. I didn't laugh very much, quite frankly. But next up, Nicole Kidman and Sean Penn in The Interpreter, which is a nice thriller. Nicole Kidman plays a translator for the United Nations who happens to overhear what she thinks is a threat for an assassination, and the whole thing is investigated by government agent Sean Penn, who begins to suspect that she has something to do with it. So they're working together, but they're also working against each other. It gets very exciting. Very, very well made film. Next up is a film directed by Steve Buscemi called Interview, who also stars in the film along with Sienna Miller, and he plays a journalist who is trying to interview this actress who is not known for being a great actress, just kind of a blonde, silly bimbo making low-budget horror films and stuff like that. And he resents the fact that he has to interview somebody like this. She resents the fact that he resents the fact that he has to talk to her. So they end up in her apartment, and not for a romantic thing, but she brings him up there because he's had an injury, and she's trying to help him. And they end up having this strange exchange during the course of the night, back and forth. And it's actually very good. It's a remake of a film that was originally made, I can't remember now, Denmark or Sweden, one of the two. And yeah, very, very interesting movie. Okay, next up is, this is a documentary called Into Great Silence, made several years ago. It's all about the life of these Carthusian monks living in a monastery in the French Alps. It's a remote monastery. The Carthusians are probably one of the most strict religious orders that exist in the Catholic Church. They live almost in complete silence all the time, and they have this ritual of sort of like ongoing prayer, what's called the Liturgy of the Hours, that they pray different times of the day and night, and the celebration of Mass every day. They chant most of their prayers in Latin, and they only speak maybe once or twice during the week. Otherwise, they live their life in silence. Now, the film is fascinating. It's overly long, I feel. It's 162 minutes long. And that's a lot of silence. I happen to be someone who likes silence, and I've always had a certain attraction to this kind of life, although I'm not good enough to be in this kind of situation. But yeah, it was a pretty good film, pretty interesting. But again, it was probably way too long. This is a fascinating movie called Into the Wild, directed by Sean Penn, starring a wonderful actor named Emile Hirsch. It also features, let's see, William Hurt, Jenna Malone, Marcia Gay Harden, Hal Holbrook, Catherine Keener. Really a fascinating, based on a true story about a young man who wanted to he was a very intelligent, college-educated young man who had a lot of potential to go on to a great career. He chucked it all because he just wanted to disappear into nature and to just travel around the United States. He ended up going to Alaska simply because he wanted to go into the wild. And it's a beautiful story. Sean Penn did a great job of directing this, and it has a lot of poignant moments to it. Okay. This is a very interesting, obscure, low-budget film called The Intruder, directed by Roger Corman in 1962, starring William Shatner, and the lead actress in the film is Jean Cooper, who of course became well known as the character Catherine Chancellor on The Young and the Restless for a very long time. This is when she was much younger. Very beautiful woman, a good actress. Most of the other actors are people who are not well known at all. This has to do with a man played by William Shatner who is from the north part of the United States, who goes down to a town in the south to stir up trouble between the white people and the black people, because this is right after the time when the Supreme Court ordered that schools had to be integrated, okay, which made a lot of the white people angry, but they were trying to go along with the law. And William Shatner belonged to this organization that was trying to stir up trouble. Basically, it was like a Nazi or a white supremacist organization trying to stir up racial hatred. So he goes into that town, wins the confidence of a lot of people, and starts stirring up violence. And it was actually filmed on location at a small town in Missouri, where these things were actually part of the local culture. And Corman said that they had to film it very quickly so that before a lot of the people were understanding exactly the kind of film that they were making, and they had to get out of Dodge very quickly, you know. So it's a fascinating film that I think a lot of people will be offended by, certainly by the language and by what's happening, but I think it's a very important film for people to see. Definitely well acted by William Shatner, who was just starting out in 1962. This is called Invincible, starring Mark Wahlberg, and it's based on a true story about a guy who became a football player for the Philadelphia Eagles, a guy named Vince Papale, who had never been a college player, was a blue-collar guy who just did this just to see if he could do it, and ends up being a great football player. But this is definitely a crowd pleaser for just about everybody. You don't even have to like football in order to just be pulling for this guy and what he's going through. Okay, Mark Wahlberg is pretty good in this. Next up is a classic film from 1934, It Happened One Night, directed by Frank Capra, starring Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert. Classic story about a runaway heiress, which was a very stereotyped character back in the 1930s, who is trying to get away from her father, and just gets pursued by this reporter, and of course they fall in love, and it's all very wonderful. And it's a great film. Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, all that sort of thing. This is a low-budget film called It Happened on Fifth Avenue, released in 1947. And it was released by Allied Artists, which recently, Monogram Pictures, one of the Poverty Row studios, had recently changed its name to Allied Artists, but it was still very much a Monogram film. They were trying to make better pictures. This stars people like Don DeFore, Anne Harding, Charlie Ruggles, Victor Moore, and a young actress named Gail Storm, in kind of a story about the rich and the poor, and at the time, and mistaken identity and all that sort of thing. Strangely enough, this film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Story by Roy Del Ruth, which is really hard to believe for such a low-budget film from a Poverty Row studio. But it was kind of a Christmas film, sort of a poor man's It's a Wonderful Life, you know, same era, same kind of sensibilities. Now this is a classic musical from 1955 called It's Always Fair Weather, starring Gene Kelly, Sid Charisse, Dan Daly, Dolores Gray, and Michael Kidd. And this was directed by Gene Kelly and Stanley Donen. This was sort of the last of the big budget MGM musicals, and it didn't do well financially or critically in 1955. So that kind of ended the cycle of musicals, but I actually like it. It's a very, very interesting and kind of a cynical story about three GIs at the end of World War II who say goodbye to each other in New York City and swear to come back 10 years later and meet again at the same bar where they're having their last drink. And of course, 10 years later, they're completely different people. They don't relate to each other. They don't really like each other. But they start getting involved in this adventure. It also has to do with the new medium of television, which by 1955 was becoming very, very popular and was threatening to well, keep people from going to the movies. So, of course, MGM was ridiculing television and kind of demonstrating what a threat it was to the way of life that MGM was trying to keep going. So anyway, it's a fascinating film, and some of the music is very good. Very good. It doesn't have any real famous, well-known songs in it, but it's a good musical nonetheless. Okay. Next up is a Charlie Chan film called The Jade Mask from 1944, made at Monogram Pictures, starring Sidney Toler. I haven't seen many of the Charlie Chan films. This is the only one that I own. It was very kind of slow-moving and stilted and kind of hard to follow the story, but it's Charlie Chan, so what the hell. I would actually enjoy seeing more of those. Okay, next up is Jake Gyllenhaal in Jarhead, also starring Peter Sarsgaard, Chris Cooper, Jamie Foxx. Not a bad film. It's just Jake Gyllenhaal goes into the Marines, and it shows how he adjusts to that kind of life, and then what happens to him while he's fighting in the war, and what happens to him afterward. And I haven't watched it for a long time, but I don't know. It's a pretty good film. Next up is J. Edgar, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Naomi Watts. Of course, the story of J. Edgar Hoover, directed by Clint Eastwood. I like this movie. It had a lot of good things in it, and Leonardo DiCaprio was very good. I feel that Naomi Watts is underused because she's such a good actress, a very emotional and expressive actress who doesn't have a lot to do in this film. But my complaint about this is that the film kept going back from one time frame to another, and I found it very hard to follow. I think they kind of overdid that concept, that way of filming it. And ultimately I found it very unsatisfying, and I don't feel like I know that much more about J. Edgar Hoover than I did before. So what the heck? What do I know? Next is a comedy called Jeffrey, starring Steven Weber, Patrick Stewart, Sigourney Weaver, Michael Weiss, and it's a comedy with kind of a serious theme. It's all about a young man played by Steven Weber who is a gay man in the age of AIDS, and he's trying to manipulate, sort of navigate the life of being gay in the age of AIDS, about romance and sexual activity, and of course a lot of it is very funny, but a lot of it's very sad as well. So it's an interesting little film. Next up is Robert Redford and Jeremiah Johnson from 1972, beautiful movie directed by Sidney Pollack. And Redford gives one of his best performances as a man who just wants to go off and live in the mountains. It's kind of like the version of Into the Wild, for that time. And it is a very, very good movie. I remember seeing that when it first came out. I really loved it. This is a biography, a documentary called Jesus Camp. Jesus Camp. Oh, this light's getting worse. Glare. Okay. A documentary about a camp in North Dakota where these children, grade school children, go away to get immersed in their evangelical Christian religion for I guess a weekend or a week or something like that. And it shows how they are the activities they get involved in at the camp, and how they all get incredibly emotional, confessing their sins, speaking in tongues, and all sorts of things. It interviews a lot of the kids, the people who are teaching them, and also the parents who are trying to get their kids to continue the same kind of Christian beliefs that the parents have. And it's very controversial, very some of it's very hard to watch, actually. Okay. Next up is a film I've talked about before, Johnny Guitar, starring Joan Crawford, Sterling Hayden, Mercedes McCambridge, John Carradine, Scott Brady, Ben Cooper, Ernest Borgnine, directed by Nicholas Ray, 1954. This is one of the weirdest westerns ever made, where Joan Crawford is the tough guy in this film. And yeah, very, very cool, very unusual film. Okay, this is a film called Judgment at Nuremberg, made in 1961, directed by Stanley Kramer, and it stars Spencer Tracy, Burt Lancaster, Richard Widmark, Marlene Dietrich, Judy Garland, Maximilian Schell, and Montgomery Clift. And it's all about the Nuremberg trials, trying the Nazi criminals for their activities during the World War II and the Holocaust. And it's very dramatic and very hard-hitting, incredibly well done, and well acted by everyone concerned. A lot of Academy Award nominations. Maximilian Schell was the Best Actor of the Year. Judy Garland made a comeback. The first film she had made since A Star is Born in 1954. She made a comeback in a terrific supporting role and was nominated for Best Supporting Actress. Very, very powerful film. Also, the film debut of William Shatner, 1961. Okay. Next up is a film version of Julius Caesar, starring Marlon Brando, James Mason, John Gielgud, Greer Garson, Deborah Kerr. I tried to sit down and watch this, and I could not get into it. I really don't have a mind for Shakespeare, but I feel like there's something lacking in my character if I don't watch it, so eventually I will sit down to watch it. Okay. Next up, on the other side of the dramatic spectrum, is another classic, well, for me, teenage juvenile delinquent film called Juvenile Jungle from the late 1950s. This one stars Corey Allen, who of course played in Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean, and it's about a bunch of teenagers, and of course all these people are in their 20s, pushing 30, and they're getting involved in a crime caper, and it's all very interesting and lots of rock and roll and cool stuff like that. Okay, here's a double feature that I picked up. One is Kelly's Heroes, starring Clint Eastwood and Telly Savalas. The other is The Dirty Dozen, of course, starring Lee Marvin and a bunch of great actors. I have The Dirty Dozen on its own disc, which I've already talked about. I bought this to watch Kelly's Heroes, and I have not sat down to watch it yet. It's something like 143 minutes long, and I just wasn't in the mood to watch a war film. So I think I've seen it maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. I really can't remember. It's been a long time. Okay, we're almost done here. This is a documentary called The Kennedy Assassination, 24 Hours After, and it's just what it says it is, from the History Channel, and it just talks about all the things that happened right after Kennedy's assassination occurred, and the swearing in of Lyndon B. Johnson, and all the activity that happened during that very first day. So for those of us who remember this and went through this at the time, it's fascinating to watch. And finally, this is a comedy film called Kentucky Fried Movie from the year 1977. One of the funniest midnight movies that I've ever seen in my life. Saw it many, many times back in the 70s and 80s, and it is still funny. Just a series of sketches making fun of just about everything. And you see a lot of famous faces coming in there, like Bill Bixby, who played the Hulk, Tony Dow from Leave It to Beaver, George Lazenby, who played James Bond, is in it very briefly. Very, very funny movie if you haven't seen it. That's it. Sorry this went on so long. Comments are welcome.